Got a huge raft of news coming up over the course of the next hour, including a powerful video in the final segment where we take the Pope to task on his pronouncement that his critics are performing the work of the devil by criticizing him for all his edicts, his position on global government, man-made climate change, the migrant crisis, vaccine passports in Italy for anyone who wants to enter the Vatican, literally promoting, amplifying the mark of the beast in Revelations, not very Christian. We're going to get into that in the final segment of the show. We're also going to get into how Sweden is continuing to experience the wonderful, joyous benefits of multiculturalism with a huge apartment explosion, which the authorities have already come out and said is not a gas leak. It's not a gas explosion. It looks like another migrant crime gang linked attack, specifically on a police officer that was trying to derail the migrant gangs in that area of Gothenburg. Going to get into the situation in the United Kingdom in a similar context, with Breitbart reporting twice as many illegal boat migrants land in Britain this year than all of 2020. They continue to come in. They don't need coronavirus PCR tests when they come into the country. Brits who want to leave the country to go on holiday need to undergo that onerous coronavirus testing system. You can also tell you where they're putting up these migrants. Again, it's in 3-4-star hotels. Literally, the taxpayer is paying for them. Already over 150 migrants have been ensconced in a hotel in one town in Britain alone from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the British government is trying to bypass Parliament to implement vaccine passports. Of course, at first they said they would never even consider such a move, even as the rest of the world was doing it under the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. Then they came back and said, yes, we're going to implement them. Then there was a revolt in Parliament. Then they said, we're not going to implement them. The day after that, they said, yes, we're going to implement them by the end of September. Well, now it's back on the agenda again, and they're trying to bypass a parliamentary vote because they're not going to get it through. Big revolt in Australia continues. Of course, we've had the massive unruly protests in Melbourne against the mandatory vaccinations. The government responded by shutting down the construction industry for 2 weeks. That caused more protests, more police brutality, with police now even visiting people's houses if they think they're considering planning going to a protest through their social media activity. Absolute purebred tyranny happening in Australia still, but some form of revolt. Now with the police commissioner in New South Wales saying that they're going to refuse to enforce a vaccine passport mandate in clubs, restaurants, bars and other venues. We have 95% vaccination rate at Harvard, and despite that, they're experiencing a substantial outbreak of COVID. The vaccines are pathetic, ineffective, they don't work. We have 2 NBA stars who have come out very publicly over the past 24 hours and addressed their stance on refusing to take mandatory COVID-19 shots. We're going to play those clips. We're going to talk about Joe Biden saying that 97 to 98% of Americans must be vaxxed before life gets back to normal. Of course, that's a completely impossible target, and it's meant to be an impossible target because they never want life to get back to normal. That ties in with what the CEO of Pfizer said yesterday, which was that normal life won't return without regular COVID booster shots. If you haven't had your 9th COVID booster shot, you won't be able to buy food in the supermarket. That's the ultimate plan. The CEO of Moderna has come out with similar comments, so we're going to get into that. Inside footage from, again, Project Veritas from Johnson & Johnson. An official says children shouldn't get the vax due to unknown repercussions. He advised other people not to take the vaccine from inside Johnson & Johnson. I'm going to get into all that and more on the other side. Summit.news, don't go away. Now, of course, we had the New South Wales health chief come out a couple of days ago and basically tell Australians, even if you continue to get the booster shots, the COVID-19 vaccines, they're still going to keep some of the restrictions in place. We've had the construction workers protesting vociferously over the past week after the government punished them for basically refusing to take the mandatory shot, which their union demanded they do. Those protests continue in Melbourne. We've also got news out of Australia, which is actually good news today, but I'm going to get into this on the other side because The prison island of Australia is keeping its inmates in check by having the police conduct home visits to people that they suspect may be planning protests. Of course, we saw the footage back about 6 months ago now with them arresting a pregnant woman in her own home for merely planning, and even planning, protesting, planning a protest, posting about a protest on Facebook. People are being threatened with $11,000 fines for showing up at a protest. You've seen the absolute bedlam, which is the police brutality meted out against people who simply stand in the street not wearing a mask. Well, now they're literally paying people home visits if they suspect them of planning on attending a protest. We got that clip. Here it is. Prison island of Australia is now keeping its inmates in check by having thought police pay home visits to people who they suspect might be planning to attend a protest. Attend a protest? Oh my God, the absolute horror.
Mate, what we're here for is obviously just in relation to the recent protests that are popping up and whatnot, and actually just here to do welfare checks and whatnot. You're planning on going in?
I didn't know there's anything going.
No?
No.
Any planned protests that you may know of?
No, not as far as I know.
Yeah,
it's a complete surprise when the cops here. I'm like, what for?
no stress.
Just a friendly chat, that's all.
Just a friendly chat, because it's perfectly normal in a free country to have 3 cops show up on your doorstep because they think you might be thinking about criticising the government. Totally not like North Korea or anything.
So are you aware of any planned protests or events
No.
that are coming up, Jeff?
Nope.
No? Okay. Are you aware of any communication circling around between people about the planned any protests coming up?
No.
No? Do you use any platform at all or to communicate?
No.
So now it's not even if you're going to a protest, it's whether you dared think about mentioning one on social media.
Have you gone to any protests in the past?
No, I'm not going to answer that.
You haven't?
You guys wouldn't be here otherwise.
Yeah. All right.
I'd like to know how you got this address, actually.
Okay. Anything else you like to tell us that might help ensure the public safety?
They're just keeping people safe. Like when they pepper spray old women in the face or fire rubber bullets at protesters. It's for your safety.
As long as you guys aren't running around shooting people with rubber bullets like down in Victoria, we're all good.
That's also another reason why, like, they're concerned with what's happening down in Victoria, that it doesn't then escalate and come up.
Yeah, of course.
So,
yeah.
you know, just making sure your safety, our safety, everyone else's safety is safe.
Everyone's so safe, so long as the thought police ensure everyone stays home and doesn't even dare to think about talking about a protest. Everyone's gonna be so safe.
Don't start up a conversation.
Don't forget, they actually passed legislation where people who even post about protests on social media can face fines of up to $11,000. They send cops around to the homes of pregnant women and arrest them in front of their kids if they dared talk about a protest on Facebook. Australia has fallen. It can no longer claim to be a democratic country, and this should be an international outrage. Meanwhile, jackbooted thugs doled out more police brutality to construction workers demonstrating in Melbourne. And if I showed you what they did, this video would get age restricted or banned, so check it out in the description below. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button for regular updates. Australian thought police visiting people's homes. There's actually some good news out of Australia today. Finally, we have a headline here out of Summit News. Australian Police Commissioner refuses to enforce vaccine passport mandate. The revolt is actually happening, it seems, at least in one area of Australia, New South Wales, where the police commissioner has refused to enforce the state's vaccine passport mandate, revealing that officers will not be checking people's vaccination status in restaurants, clubs, or bars. Remember, we had a similar situation in France where during the first few days of this vaccine passport scheme, the photo ops, the video show police going from bar to bar, from cafe to cafe, demanding to see people's medical papers, please. But then afterwards, they stopped enforcing it entirely after the French got out on the streets and started having picnics on the streets in protest. Well, as the government in Australia is preparing to pass a mandate that will ban all unvaccinated people, those disease-ridden oafs, from gaining entry to numerous venues up until at least December 1st in a repeat of the segregation scheme that's been adopted in numerous Western countries. But New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller said it was clear that his officers wouldn't be on patrol. He said, quote, "The role of police in terms of vaccine passports, we will not be walking through restaurants, cafes and pubs checking if people are double vaccinated," which contradicts what the health minister in that country said, Brad Hazard, who asserted it would be the police's job to enforce the measures, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So they're not going to get it done in Australia because the government's expecting the police to do it. The businesses there are saying they don't have the resources or the wherewithal to do it. And in fact, unlike in France and other countries, the businesses won't face fines if they allow those dirty, filthy, unvaccinated people through the door. So it seems like a pointless exercise. So some final, green growth shoots of rebellion happening in Australia. Meanwhile, we see a similar situation in Israel. Israelis rise up against vaccine passports after being told more shots needed to be considered fully vaccinated. Remember, this is in a country where the Pfizer vaccine has gone down to an efficacy of about 37%, and that was weeks ago. It's probably even lower now. They rolled out the vaccine passports. They rolled out the vaccines, one of the most covered countries in terms of vaccinations in the world. Then they had a massive spike in COVID cases because the vaccines don't work properly. Well, protests have finally erupted in Israel as it slowly dawned on people there that the goalposts for vaccine passports keep being shifted by the government. Over the weekend, there were numerous marches that took place in the streets of Tel Aviv against the so-called Green Pass. So they're rising up. The Italians continue to protest. We saw a video yesterday of the police in Italy removing their helmets in solidarity with the anti-mandatory vax protesters. This, of course, was after we had this headline: Italy orders companies not to pay unvaccinated workers. They're trying to get around the fact that these employees are going to sue the businesses. They're going to try and sue the government by simply telling the businesses not to fire the employees, but just to not pay them if they don't show up for work. They can't show up for work. They're not allowed in because they haven't had the mandatory vaccine. Meanwhile, the British government is trying to bypass Parliament to implement vaccine passports again. They're doing it through a public consultation and saying that it's going to be their plan B. It's probably not going to happen, don't worry, unless they get a convenient rise in COVID cases over the winter. And of course, they lied about it, said it had been completely scrapped. The very next day came out and said it would be a, quote, first line defense against a winter wave of COVID. I'm sure they'll be able to accomplish that by meddling with the numbers, as we've seen in the past. But again, they're launching a public consultation in an attempt to enlist support for the scheme because they know they don't have the votes to get it through Parliament constitutionally and legally. Summit.news will be back. No, go away. So as the revolt continues against mandatory vaccinations and lockdown restrictions in countries like Australia and Italy, we have a situation in America where Joe Biden has come out and said 97 to 98% of Americans must be vaxxed before we get back to normal. He was asked how many need to be vaccinated for us to get back to normal. What is the percentage of total vaccinations that have to be deployed? Biden said, I think we get the vast majority like what's going on in some industries and some schools, 97, 98%. I think we're getting awful close. They're not getting awful close to that. They're never going to get up to that. There's going to be at least 15%, at least, who don't take them. And they know they're never going to get up to that level. And they know life is never going to get back to normal if they have their way, because it's an unobtainable goal. Then you look at situations where they vaccinated 95% of people, like on Harvard campuses. We have this headline: despite 95% vaccination rate, Harvard experiences substantial outbreak of COVID. This is Harvard Business School, which has been forced to move its first and second year students to remote learning after a substantial outbreak of COVID. This is the head of communications for Harvard Business School. In recent days, we've seen a steady rise in breakthrough infections among our student population. Despite admitting that this breakthrough didn't even happen on campus, they're moving it all offline again, all back to remote learning, complete waste of money. According to their own dashboard, meanwhile, 95% of students and 96% of employees are vaccinated against the virus, yet they've just had a huge spike, just like what happened in Israel, where they had a massive spike after vaccinating the majority of the population. It's happening on the campus of Harvard Business School. This again underscores how people will be mandated to get constant booster shots with all the attendant health risks, because the longevity of protection the vaccine offers is minimal. Meanwhile, as the Israeli study showed, antibodies, natural immunity, offers 27 times more protection than the vaccine. But now the media is out, as we've seen over the past few days, busy suddenly claiming that natural immunity and antibodies don't exist at all. We had Vice magazine come out with a ridiculous headline to that effect. So the vaccines aren't working, and yet they're continuing to assert that Americans need to comply and take the vaccine, despite the fact, again, that with this vaccine passport scheme in many countries, they're ruling out the ability to provide a negative test, despite the fact that that proves you don't carry the virus. Having the vaccine doesn't prove you don't have the virus, because the vaccine is turning out to be largely ineffective after a period of time.